Well, I'm here today with Clint Wilcke. Clint serves as the coordinator catalyst for the Mid-South Church Planting Network, which encompasses what? Western Tennessee, Arkansas, most of Arkansas, southeastern Louisiana, and Mississippi. Is that right, Clint?
Yeah,
You
that's
got that?
pretty
Good.
pretty on target there.
All right. Well, say I do my homework.
There you
Uh,
go.
yeah. Tell me. Let's just start off. It's a network. What is a network in general? And then I want to hear about the history of the Mid-South Church Planting Network.
Yeah, the network in general consists of about 135 churches in those areas, but about 30 to 35 of those churches partner regularly to support myself as ministry coordinator, and then support the church planters directly through their missions budgets and committees and presbyteries. So yes, come alongside presbyteries, encouraging, promoting, and church planting. Yeah.
Good. Well, then the Mid South Church Planting Network. Give us a little brief overview of its history. How did
Okay.
it come about, and how did you
Sure.
get involved?
So got involved early on as a church planter with other church planters in our area, in our presbytery, Covenant Presbytery, and it was a group of men who were already planting churches and promoting church planting. And we said, why don't we pool our resources together and find ways to plant more churches and align more of the vision of church planting in a collegial way. So, Presbytery didn't raise their hand and say, hey, you guys do this. We just, our presbytery was naturally planting. So we created a nonprofit, Mid South Church Planting Network, in I think 2010 or 11, and called our first church planter Hunter Bailey, who planted in Fayetteville, Christ community there. And then Hunter Brewer came along in 2013 and wanted to expand it to the presbytery he was serving in, along with the other presbyteries in our region, that making up those four presbyteries in the Mid South. And so we passed the baton to him, and he did a great job kind of, finding bigger commitments of money to try to get churches launched. He was able to recruit his friends pretty successfully to even plant. So in the last 10 years, we've planted 6 churches in the last 10 years and have 6 active church plants currently in our areas.
So you've planted 10 in that space. Tell me about the active plants right now. Where are they at? What are they like?
Well, 6 churches in 10 years,
Okay.
and then 6 active plants.
Okay.
So you want to ask more about just the plants themselves, or what do we mean by active
Yeah,
plants?
but just give us a little overview. Where are the plants? What are they
Okay.
up to? And then talking more of the logistics.
Yeah. So the active plants are places recognized in our presbyteries like Bartlett, Tennessee, fast growing area in West Tennessee. So Bartlett, Tennessee, South Haven, which is North Mississippi, and another location, maybe potentially even in Little Rock. There's discussions happening there now. And if you move down to Jackson, Mississippi, we have the Florence corridor area, which is South Jackson. And we've actually just had a church planter assessed and approved to continue in the process. And they've identified another, Presbytery has identified another location. So we're actively, I'll serve, I think, Lord willing, even as an advisory role with that Presbytery to find a planter for a new area there, 39211 corridor. And then we have 2 locations down in Baton Rouge that have been identified and put before their presbytery. So, those are the active places that we're working on right now. And some have a planter, some are looking to one, some are being interviewed, different places process for each one right now.
Yeah. So, okay, as a Presbyterian, not to take the words from the Book of Acts, uh, sessions I know, presbyteries I know, networks I do not know. Um,
Right.
why a network? Why those are great to see those plants. Why just although those four presbyteries just plant churches? So how is the network
Yeah.
part of that?
Well, I guess the origins of the Mid South really were more intentionality. So how can we intentionally focus our time and energy in planting? And then I would say the network is really just creating a conversation about the Great Commission in those areas, and just keep raising the hand. Let's work together for the sake of church planting. Now, what we have found, obviously, in our denomination, one of the challenges is that the chairman, the M&A chairmen, the Mission of North American chairmen of each of those presbyteries, they're full-time pastors, and so they can't regularly engage like I can as ministry coordinator every single day, even like an interview like this, every single day, thinking, talking about recruiting, taking calls. So you have to have somebody that just keeps raising their hand. How can I serve? How can we find more places to plant? How can we find more planters? So it is really a full-time job and just keeping those opportunities moving. And so that's where the network comes along and collegially in a partnership kind of way just says, hey, we just want to focus more on that. And we don't have the time as individual churches or presbyteries and connections to keep doing the work, in a siloed fashion.
So when it comes time to decide where to plant, who to plant, and how they're going to be assessed, how much of that comes from the presbytery versus the network? So as a network, do you go into a presbytery and say, we have a planter and they're going to be planting in this town in your presbytery?
No, it happens in so many different ways organically. So the three things we need are, a planter, a place, and funding. And sometimes funding is set aside. Sometimes a place is identified by a group of pastors, or M&A says, can we develop this site? So and then sometimes there's planters saying, hey, I would really like to plant in that area. I'm from there. Or are you interested in having a guy there? So there is no sacrosanct way to do it. And it comes in all kinds of ways. And so sometimes even groups of people find a planter they want. And, we go through that process with them. Sometimes we bring them a planter or a name to consider. So every church plant is so unique.
Yeah. But the final decision, it's still coming from the presbytery. So it's not as though you're not doing an end run around a presbytery. You're there to serve and supply what they may not have, to be able to handle on their plates. Okay, that's great.
Yeah, so we're doing more equipping and supporting of that decision that's made at the presbytery level. And a big part of it is how we support and equip and the planter as he moves through those stages of chapters of church planting. So we do come along. That is the role in which, again, a network can support the church planter and his wife in ways that a presbytery just can't regularly do that. And so we use the resources that we raise to help me do my work, and also to use things like, pipeline development, ongoing coaching, ongoing relationship training in groups of pastors, as well as their wives, and in groups as well.
Yeah, let's talk about that a bit more. So yeah, your services are, kind of go beyond just, okay, you're the person, go do it. We'll talk to you later. So how are you training and supporting, I guess, in that sense? What services do you offer for them that can help the planter prosper, thrive, flourish?
So if you want to see funding from the network itself and the partnering churches, we do require them to go through assessment. We can help with that, but usually presbyteries or churches are willing to help pay for that. So that's one way. At least we create the conversation. We find the dates for assessment and talk to people to help get them in the queue to be assessed. That's one thing. I guess another area is if you want to come plant in the Mid-South, we really do believe foundationally in gospel coaching and coaching in general. So we will even pay for the first year of coaching. That's been our practice. And there's some benefits to that as we try to have that church planter ramp up, even building into their budget future coaching, because we want an ongoing coaching relationship for them, with them. And that's done with somebody, it could be done with somebody in our network who've kind of been trained for coaching, but usually it's somebody outside of our geographical area that's through Zoom and a visit. And then Parakaleo, which we use some of the materials are used by the leaders they have trained in our area. And so we've been able to use Emily Hartman and now Mariana Shaw.
Yeah, tell us parakaleo. What is it, and
Yeah,
how does that help?
Parakaleo. Yeah, obviously a really a ministry started out of, and I remember when we came out of assessment, Tammy Risch and Sherry Thomas, creating this opportunity for church planting wives to be supported and encouraged as they entered the mission field. And as it's evolved now with the leadership and direction of Deneen Blevins, expanding the kind of licensing of the material and also training of the leaders to help create these cohorts of women for both coaching and equipping as they serve on the church planting field. So it's been a huge resource and encouragement, and it's expanded even a little bit in our area to helping some pastor wives as well access that gospel material to help think through the dynamics of being a pastor's wife, a church planting wife. So obviously, if the couple is thinking through the gospel and ministry dynamics together, they're going to be much more successful and healthier. We believe in long-term ministry in a particular place.
Yeah. So then what you're describing is you're there to help the planter, get through the whole process, get location, get assessed. But then once they're planting, you're also providing ongoing services. And in this case, specifically with parakaleo for the wives as well, so that they're part of a team. We want to make sure they're doing well. And what other things do you do for the planters?
So twice a year, even our standing rules require us to meet together as an executive committee, and we always invite our planters there, and even other leaders in our denomination to come speak to us about church planting. So we've been able to have Erwin Ince and Paul Hahn in the past, and others to help hear about what's going on in church planting denominationally. And those events allow the church planters to come and share what's going on in their work, and to have people pray for them, to catch up with those churches that are supporting them. So that happens twice a year, plus some informal times of gathering, mini retreats for a couple days in two different areas, happen usually annually, so that guys can connect to hear what's going on. We've done book studies and Zoom calls and stuff like that to help process mission field dynamics. And particularly through COVID, we spent a lot of time doing that. And, so supporting them by gathering them together. And I have seen the benefit when those guys are together, they're actually encouraging and equipping each other to be faithful, stay on the field, sharing those common experiences. Even in a way, as a ministry coordinator, I can't give that much encouragement compared to like the other planters being together and praying with and for each other. So that's been a neat dynamic of the collegial nature of planting. Even though we're spread out pretty far geographically, our context is very similar for the most part in the Mid-South. So a lot of things are translatable, even if they're a little bit different contextually.
Okay. Then your interaction with them, what does that look like? So I'm a church planter. What should I expect from you from the beginning of the process all the way through?
Yeah, so if my regular engagement with the church planters is obviously just regular calls and catch up and follow up. I don't have a formal coaching role with them per se, other than really doing more of sort of pastoral soul care kinds of conversations. So just checking on them in general, but then a lot of it turns into administrative. If a church is committed and maybe there's funding that hasn't come yet, or trying to set up mission committee meetings for them, getting them before people in our presbyteries. So a lot of the work is me going ahead of them to help create conversations they can't have or haven't had yet. And then also just doing follow-up for them. Sometimes it's, whether they preach somewhere or they're raising funds somewhere, how can they, continue to grow that relationship with one of our partner churches, and how can we work more collaboratively together? So a lot of it's the middleman going back and forth and just making sure the church planter has what he needs. The presbyteries are supporting the work, and the churches in those presbyteries kind of know what's going on, because invariably I get the question, well, how is so-and-so doing and what's going on? And then sometimes I can follow up for mission chairs, pastors, or presbyteries, because I have the time and expertise to do that. And then vice versa, I can help the church planter and his wife. We found funding, giving, sending, and even equipping during crises and different kinds of issues. Right, we were able to jump in. I was able to drive down and visit, and be with them, and pastor them through some difficult things. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's that kind of relationship, pastoral and administrative.
Mm-hmm. Uh, is there with that? Is there a story you can kind of tell to give some flesh on those bones where you've been able to?
Yeah, and I would
That you're
say
able to share, obviously.
yeah, and I think it's been shared. I think you've even a situation like two planters. I think of Philip and Lori Seeley,
Hmm.
and in the midst of him planting, contracting stage 4 cancer, and just trying to pray with and for them, and encouraging others to go down and see them. So I know there was a lot of pastoral visits.
Hmm.
I called a few pastors and said, if you have time, it would be of huge value to go there and serve and love them, and the benefit of that, hearing just helping them through that time of difficulty and suffering,
Hmm.
and even their willingness to serve in the hardest season of that, and even talking about their work and promoting a video to encourage the work, which now we have another planter there in Ocean
Okay.
Springs, Mississippi. So that's very encouraging. Then
Yeah,
Josh and
because
Emily Kynes. Yeah. Yeah.
Philip passed away.
He did. He
Yeah.
passed away, I believe it's January 12th, 2020. Yeah,
Yeah.
2020.
Right.
Yeah.
And now Mark
Yeah.
Horn is there, and
Mark and Stephanie are there
yeah.
now, after been there a year, moving to more core group meetings and Bible studies. He's still doing a lot of, just talked to him yesterday, a lot of evangelism, as he engages the community and continues to
Yeah.
do so while raising support, preaching in the
Hmm.
many different areas. So,
Yeah.
yeah, ongoing relationship with each of those planters and their wives, has been, it's the thing I love the most in being the ministry coordinator.
Yeah.
So that's been a real gift.
So
Yeah.
what you're providing is just that, not only the relational or network, use the term again, but the interconnection, helping them make connections, but making sure they're seen, heard, cared for, they're not forgotten. That again, in our structure, as wonderful as it is, it's hard when you have committees that are made up of volunteers with other things on their plate. So a network provides that support, that the planters are
Yep.
not alone.
Yeah. One other area too, I think, is just the knowledge of the area. I guess I've been in the
Mm,
Mid-South 30 years now. So I know people in each of those regions. Um, so even helping them prepare their budgets or meet with missions committees and
mm,
kind of give them some preparation of what they're going to see and hear as they engage different kinds of churches in different parts of the Mid-South. So that is a real, I think, a big help to a lot of them, because they'll say, well, how do you think, we should handle this proposal, or we're
yeah.
dealing with this in our church plant. How do you think Presbytery could help, or can this church help? So a lot of it's just because of just being here this long, knowing the area, and helping them become acclimated, to
Hmm.
this area. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I mean, one of the challenges we're often finding with M&A committees is the chair and the committee itself changes quite often. And so
Correct.
you don't always have the longevity of knowing some of that history, and to be able to say, do not show up at First Pres in a pair of shorts, a t-shirt, and sandals if you're
Right.
asking for money. It's just not
Yeah.
going to go well
Yes.
necessarily.
Yes.
Uh, s-
Yes.
Speaking of money, how is the network funded, and how is
Yeah.
one a
So
part of the network?
sure. Um, we had changed our model to basically a suggested donation model based upon the size of your congregation. It could be community, non-community. We even let churches define that. But our vision has to involve churches of all sizes to participate. The initial vision was a few churches putting together some funds and recruiting first planter. When Hunter came in, he borrowed more of the Southwest model, where there was some funding guaranteed for 5 years to kind of get things off the ground. We found, because of the diversity of our presbyteries and the way we function, that we have been able, by the grace of God, I think, to help depoliticize some of the money, and help
Mm,
focus and helping me do my administrative pastoral work as a ministry coordinator, and funding them separately. So what we have gone to is a model of a church of about 100 or less. Would you give $1,000 a year? If you were 100 to 250, would you give 2,000? If you're 250 to 500, would you consider giving 5,000? If you're above 500, would you give 15,000 a year? And generally, that's allowed churches to participate at all different levels,
Mm-hmm.
but they, in a unique way, they can partner with many churches and hear about updates and hear about the work through social media and all kinds of things. And they're a part of that, even
Yeah.
though, they may have not been able to give percentage of their budget long ago. They now can give things directly to the church planter and then help support the work. So I think it's created a lot more collegiality and a lot more people giving at multiple different levels
Mm-hmm.
and still participating in the work.
Yeah.
And I think it's freed up some of the churches that had to give a lot of money initially. It's allowed them to have more flexibility, even their mission budgets, and allows them to focus on those planters more relationally and specifically as
Mm.
well.
So to participate in the network, to as I say, to receive any of the benefits in your context, because every network does it a little bit differently. Is it
Mm-hmm.
required that you're giving, or let's just say we never have, but hey, we're interested in planting. Can you help us out? Sending this guy to assessment and then give him money to plant. How does that work?
Yeah, it's all voluntary. It's
Okay.
really just simply, hey, we need to plant more churches, and we haven't seen many churches planted in XYZ periods of time in particular places. So we want you to get behind the work. And I do think, again, Hunter being and planting in our network, and then me being here for 30 years, there are just a lot of relationships that allow that to be again voluntary and collegial. So, but if a church is committed saying, yes, we're going to give, when I know in 2023 or 24, they've committed X amount of dollars, those are things that I follow up with because, hey, you want to be a part of the partnership. And the partnership is made up of an executive committee. And our standing rules are even being modified with the new models that we
Mm.
have. But we have each M&A chairman, by virtue of his office and their presbyteries, get to participate in
Okay.
thinking through vision, philosophy, ministry, and execution of ministry. So there's a natural inroad there being connected to our presbyteries with the M&A chairman who
Mhm.
want to serve. And then the church leaders whose churches are giving at those levels suggested have an opportunity to serve on the executive committee at some point, depending on how many openings there are for each of those four presbyteries.
Okay. So then, in short, you're not just running this however you want to see it go. You have
No.
your own accountability there as well.
Yep. There's a chairman, and I serve at the will of the executive committee
Yeah.
to execute the standing rules which we have in place.
Okay. Good. Yeah. And again, every network's a little bit different, and how they're structured, and even within the PCA. And you go outside the PCA, then it gets even much broader. So we're
Yes.
talking a little bit about the strengths of a network, of the collegiality, of the connectedness, support, and all of that. What are some of the challenges or possible hurdles that people should be aware of when you talk about a network?
Yeah, I think in our culture and cultural moment, however we want to describe that, there is, I think in maybe even in the PCA, there's fear that we are not being Presbyterian enough or not being, but by virtue of being as connected as we are through all the work we do as presbyteries, the relationships and the official credentialing that we have, there tends to be just a process where people maybe even opposed to a network, like, well, that sounds extra biblical or subverting the work of the formal work of a presbytery. But in fact, it really is trying to just build a partnership and say, well, how can I help you? And if we were doing a good job at this collectively, maybe we wouldn't even need a network, right, to continue to promote the work more regularly. So I think there's challenges politically, like, and again, do you trust the leader who's leading the network? I think that's a big, as I've talked to other
Hmm.
network leaders or who are going to become network leaders, are they trusted leaders? Do people know them? And I think by virtue of what Hunter did and even me coming in there, I think people and I've invited anybody from core groups to presbyteries to churches and sessions to come speak with me if they have any issues, as well as probably just the biggest thing is just talking about the Great Commission when I go and preach and teach at a lot of churches throughout the Mid-South. That alleviates so much of what they may fear is church planting, and maybe some fears because of all the things we've seen come out in social media with all the failure and church abuse and all those kinds of things. I think it brings, when you get to meet and hear about and know about the work and how they're even funding it, kind of brings a level of anxiety and trust is raised. That takes time, but I think it alleviates some of the fear that they have seen that, and even maybe in a joking way, if people are worried that church planting is going to lead to, progressivism or liberalism, at this rate of church planting in the Mid-South, I say, well, that if to change the nature and makeup of the four presbyteries, it will take decades of plants, and we're not planting at that rate. So trying to even bring some of those fears down but the challenges for church planters are real. They really are frontline ministers, their families, and they're getting intel on the field in those presbyteries where things are actually happening. So I think they're even relieved when they hear they really are doing hard things in very similar areas, and some of the church planting kinds of things that are happening. Churches say, well, maybe we can do some of those things. So it actually brings in another area where, if you're talking about planting, you're going to talk about renewal or vitality. And sometimes our church planters give a lot of hope for that idea of vitality, renewal, and re-engaging their community. Because if the church planter can do it, why can't we do it in very similar contexts? So even some of those fears are brought down when they hear what our church planters actually are facing. Because some churches, they are several steps removed and maybe have become, as all churches want to do, become very inward focused by virtue of the things that they have to structure and build into programs and ministry and shepherding.
Yeah. So I think that's an important thing for people to be reminded of, that church planting doesn't suck the vitality out of the existing churches have done well. It's not just, hey, we're here for your people and your money, but it can actually enliven and encourage an established church as they see, learn, participate. Any examples or stories there that you've seen in the Mid-South where that's happened, where a church plant has brought a sense of renewal to existing churches or new life?
Yeah, I think in thinking about reaching out to the different cultures in a particular area, they've heard churches have success or using, ways to translate in real time when they're preaching, they're translating in Spanish. And some churches can say, well, maybe we can, do some of those things. So some of the things going on, like at Christ Fellowship, which is no longer a plant, but is serving in Horn Lake. There's lots of interaction with multicultural environment. People coming and go, well, maybe we think through this, we can do this. I remember one church planter saying, him equipping his core group, saying, what's your gospel story? Can you tell some of your gospel story in 2 minutes? So not sort of like the, evangelism explosion, but just, can you share about how God's grace is working in your life? And then another way probably I use a lot, even as we develop cohorts and pastors meeting together, asking questions, because in church planting, you have to develop leaders or you'll never plant a church. So the question going back to other churches is, how are you developing leadership and trust in your own diaconate or session or church? Is anybody meeting together to engage the gospel in relationship? And so, you hear the stories of what's going on with how they're raising up leaders in church planting, and it comes back, or a church planter comes and shares those stories. We're like, wow, maybe we can do that as well. Maybe we haven't tried to do that in a long time. Maybe God would be so kind as to help us think more outwardly and relationally about ministry as we move forward. So, yeah.
Oh, great. And when we talk about networks, they come in all sorts of shapes, sizes, forms, contexts. In the PCA, just given the way we're structured, it's going to be not anything goes. Obviously, there's some structures. And often we talk about the kind of a network matrix. We talk about an alignment continuum and a structure continuum. The alignment continuum is the alignment is theological versus missional. Not that they're opposed, but some networks will be more specific on the theological constructs. Others will be on the missional. That you can have a much more breadth of churches and different traditions and such, but their approach to the community has the same missional context, or we're very specific on the theological, but the missional might change. The other line in there is the structure continuum. So if you think of a matrix, kind of a cross there, is to the degree, is it centralized or decentralized? Does the network leader have organizational authorities? A decentralized decision making is really democratic, and every church has their own abilities to make those decisions. With that in mind, where do you see Mid-South fitting along those lines of the alignment continuum of theological, missional, and the structural continuum of centralized, decentralized?
Yeah, that's a super good question. I think of it visually as sort of like an umbrella with a few things happening under. I think I stole the illustration from Underground Church, which parts of the book are super good, some are not as helpful. But I think the picture of umbrella where authority, right, and networking together can actually create a lot of good gospel movement and encouragement. So the good thing is we have the authority based, structure based, by virtue of how we are connected ecclesiologically. And we also have in our Reform heritage this understanding of we are connected. We are the people of God, and we are members of presbytery as ministers. So we ought to exploit that connectedness relationally and missionally while we're all still under the authority of our presbytery. So one of the challenges, right, is to keep, because if the authority structure, chokes out collaboration and an opportunity to network and promote, then it will no longer it won't exist, right? And then of course, if there's just a kind of a freewheeling structure like you've seen in other networks or outside the PCA where there's money, there's gifted people, and you go, but there's no real continued authority and responsibility back and forth between the network leaders and their planters, then it dissolves into its own thing. So it's that living in that tension between we have authority and we have the opportunity to collaborate. How can we join those together, align those together in a way that is missional, that does remind it that we are wanting to be obedient to the Great Commission? So in our own world, right, in the PCA world, we do want to be, faithful to the scriptures, true to the Reformed faith. I simply focus a lot on, so how is that related to being obedient to the Great Commission? We already have our structures and our theology and our credentialing in place. What we need is movement with collaboration, prayerful engagement, longing for God to work. There's tons of Holy Spirit revival needed in all of our churches and in our presbyteries. And it's been neat to see, since you brought that up, how church planting has become a very positive thing in most of the presbyteries in which we labor. Like people are still praying and giving for the work, even if they're maybe opposed to a network or the it's not as clear as they would like it to be in their theological orbit. But they do celebrate the Great Commission. So we have seen even new groups of people who would probably be, very doctrinal, biblicist kind of mindset folk, but still praying because it's a work of their presbytery. And so if God is in it and it's happening, we should celebrate it and promote it. So we really do think church planting in our presbyteries is one of the positive things that we can collaborate on. Because we're kind of set up in our court system to only deal with problems in our structures and metrics, but not a lot of opportunity to collaborate for the good growth and health. And of course, this very well. We have churches shutting down in those presbyteries, and just like any presbytery in the PCA, how are we going to replace those churches once they have shut down? And I do think that's just a simple reality that everybody has
Yeah.
to face. We've lost two churches. We've only gained one in, the last year.
Hmm.
So I do think people are seeing and feeling that more now than ever before as we see sort of the decline of the nominal Christian showing up anymore.
Right.
And then how that's impacting church attendance, which did not impact us quite the same pre-COVID.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, share some of the maybe some other stories of kind of like bragging on your kids. Um, what are some of the things that in the years you've been serving as a coordinator of the Mid South Church Planting Network, you go, this is just a story I love telling, or here's a situation where we really saw God at work, and it was the work of the network that was behind it.
Well, I think probably the most recent particularization of Dan Anderson and his wife Kimberly in Little Rock, particularizing Central Hope, and then just hearing a church exist. They have been in the area and involved in moving towards planting for the last 9 years. So it's taken a
Okay.
long time.
Okay. Wait. So it's been a 9-year process.
They were in the area and then
Yeah.
moved to planting in like the last. So they were
Okay.
2 years as kind of interns and then 7 years
Right.
as actual. And I don't think I knew the extent of the length of that history,
Yeah.
but then to see that they really have reached a lot of 40 and unders,
Mm.
uh, which can only explain the reason like they've been in like 7 locations in 9 years or something like that. And then to have and then to see just the African American leadership raised up from just building relationships, not even intentionally saying we need to talk about this issue or that issue, but just doing ministry and
Hmm.
building relationships. Creates two ruling elders who are African American ruling elders in an area of a bunch of young people who have a chance for the first time to have a seat at leadership, a table of leadership, which I do
Mm.
think is a beautiful part about church planting. And they would have never had those opportunities to be leaders in any church had it not been through. And so, is it
Hmm.
going to be young and messy? Absolutely, but they are actually going to learn the intel. So on the field in real time of what's going on with the next generation behind us, or generation and a half for me. So
Hmm.
that's super encouraging. Like that's reaching those kinds of people and equipping them to serve in that area. And then I think of the different iterations of even Christ Fellowship that I worship at when I'm in town, not preaching or on the road, but the different iterations and challenges, and still God is blessing that work. When probably even as a network leader, I was like, I don't know if they're going to make it, but God blessed it, and God raised up new leaders, and all kinds of people that we would have never known would have gathered in that place and opportunities to serve. So yeah, those one really near me, and then maybe one in Little Rock, and then there were just so many other stories, just amazing stories about people sacrificial giving to a plant because the church planter shepherded their a drug addicted child who got clean and got healthy. Just I don't even know. There's so many stories, but I would think the younger church being gathered in a very culturally diverse and generationally diverse church, all happening within the Mid South and celebrating that work together, and
Yeah.
really in real time, those relationships, both those planters know each other well and celebrate the uniqueness of each of their works and how important it is for future health of our presbyteries.
Yeah. Oh, that is great. That is great. Well, thank you. Thank you so much. It was a helpful kind of overview for the Mid South Church Planting Network, and appreciate your time, and trust this will be helpful to those who are listening. Thanks.